A lot of coaches will say, I play a very particular style, and then I want to recruit to that style. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. That's a super valid approach, another way to go about things. But the way that we did recruitment, our approach is very different. Say, hey, we're going to work to build a squad that is sort of balanced, but not specifically focused on a particular style. If we might play a very sort of ball possession on the ground style, but if all of a sudden we have an opportunity to acquire an incredible target man at a great value, then yeah, we might want to alter our style a little bit. And we made sure that we had a coach that had that tactical flexibility. So instead of saying, hey, here's my rigid tactics and we need to get the specific exact players for this tactical system, it's saying, here's a bucket of players. And look, we're not giving you 20 left backs. We're giving you a balanced squad. But the idea is to say, it's then up to the coach to decide what's the best tactical system to execute on that. And so that requires a lot more sort of flexibility and sort of tactical intelligence. And so that's sort of how we thought about coach recruitment, as well as a coach that's just going to be easy to work with, going to work within the club system and so on.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting because that has been a huge debate in England, again, as you're probably aware, um, with certain head coaches very wedded to a certain style of play.
Yeah.
Um, and that has even seemed to be attractive to some clubs, but you went for the opposite of that.
The opposite. But again, you got to hire someone with tactical flexibility. So if you bring in someone who's only ever played a 4-4-2 and you happen to bring them in a system where you have, great attacking wing backs and they like force them into a defensive fullback style. So you need someone that really has that tactical flexibility. And so there's certainly pros to sort of recruiting to a specific style. You can really sort of like get that great alignment. There's sort of there's multiple flaws, but the two big ones are that when you do that, you're really sort of constraining your possible squad. So, imagine you're playing a very particular style. And you say, I need players of very particular archetypes that sort of fit within that style. As a result, you're drastically reducing the sort of set of players that you're interested in. And that means if for whatever reason those players are really expensive relative to their contributions, you essentially are going to get really poor value. And so, given that you have sort of a fixed budget, you're actually going to get lower quality players than if you maybe got players that are sort of outside of that tactical system. You get better value. And so it's like, are you better sort of having poor for a given budget? Again, that's the key part. For a given budget, you might be in a situation where you have to decide, would I rather have worse players that fit this system perfectly or better players that are a slight mismatch? And that's essentially like the decision that's going on. And then the second piece of why this is problematic, you see this over and over again at the big clubs where they'll recruit to a given manager's style, and then they get rid of the manager. They bring in a new manager with a different style. That manager wants to change things drastically. So this, to be clear, is not the coach's fault, right? It's the club's fault for bringing in someone who on repeat with different styles and sort of different types of players, and then you end up with these huge budgets and so on. So that's obviously a recipe for failure as well.
So it basically gave you greater flexibility, you think, in terms of recruiting players and coaches as well.
Exactly right. So the way if you go back to my experience years and years ago in the NBA, there was a time when actually it's still true now largely that um, 3-point shooters like the Steph Currys of the world for a while there, like in the early, let's say 2015 to 2020, this was like before the game was starting to accelerate this way, but there wasn't the talent there at those positions. They became extremely expensive. So like having shooters was very, very expensive. And so in terms of like a return on investment, you were oftentimes better saying, okay, let's just have a mediocre shooter and let's put like a great other players around them, right? So I heard a story in baseball where, going into the trade deadline and saying, we are the weakest team in the league in our relief pitching. So this is like, the pitchers that come in after the starting pitcher. But the cost of those pitchers was so immense that we were actually better. We went from having so we made some decisions and we actually rather than sort of going from worse pitching to try and get average there, it was a better return on our investment to go from the being the 15th best shortstop to the third best shortstop. So like sometimes it's better to improve on your strengths than sort of try and tackle those weaknesses. And it's really a function of ultimately what's the ROI on that investment. And from a fan, that's really hard to understand because you just see the end player come in and you think, hold on, they have the worst left back in the league. Why in the world did they go buy a right winger? This makes no sense. And it's possible that just um, let's say they were going to spend an extra 5 million. It's possible that they made the decision that that 5 million was was better deployed in terms of improvement of the team at that position. Taking them from having an average right wing to a great right winger, that was a better return on investment than going from a bad left back to a mediocre left back, for example.
And is there generally value if you could be counterintuitive then and go against the herd or go against the norms?
Yes, certainly. Certainly, if there are if you look right now at like everyone has sort of copied the Pep and Klopp style, right? In fact, football's become a little bit well, dare I say hard
Homogenous.
to homogenous. Good, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's like I was going to say hard to watch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because of that. And so I think that the teams that really sort of deviate from that, like what comes to mind is the Barnsley team from a couple of years ago that like played the craziest long ball style I think I've ever seen, and had a lot of success with it. So yeah, I think sort of zagging when others are zigging is valuable, but only in so much as that when you're going in a different direction, it's not sort of ways that are less efficient. So like in the NBA as an example, if sorry, I keep hammering on basketball on a football
That's
pod, but
interesting. Yeah.
right, every team is moving towards taking more 3-point shots. If you say, oh, we're gonna not take 3-point shots to be, differentiated, the problem is like that's a very inefficient strategy, not taking 3-point shots, right? It'd be like a football club saying like, oh, everyone's now no one takes short corners anymore. We're going to start taking short corners again. And it's like, well, that's a bad idea. Short corners are very inefficient, right? And so, it's where you want to be orthogonal to others in terms of having a, differentiated. It's just you just want to do it in a way which isn't making you worse.